Funny how so many people have such a rosy picture of the past. Seem to think of it as a time when the only water and air were pure water and air. When the streets were all clean, the folks well scrubbed, and everyone was healthier because their lives were more natural. But you know, I've been around long enough to remember the good old days, and I can tell you that where most things are concerned, important things like sanitation and personal hygiene, controlling disease and keeping kids healthy, the old days weren't all that good. At least not compared to these days. While sanitation is pretty much a modern development, it isn't a new idea. In fact, it's an old idea that got lost and rediscovered. It goes back at least 7,000 years to when the Babylonians discovered that contaminated water could cause disease and made a daily practice of bringing in a fresh supply and removing the old. The Egyptians did the same and added laws that required homes and towns to be kept clean. Well over 2,000 years ago, the Greek physician Hippocrates recognized that cleansing could prevent infection. He was the first to recommend such practices as washing wounds with boiled water. And consider the Romans. Along with sewer systems and public baths, they built aqueducts to bring clean water into their cities. They accumulated quite a knowledge of sanitation, the Romans did. But with them, it died, because when their empire fell and the power moved north, none of that knowledge went with it. For sanitation, the medieval times truly were the Dark Ages. Towns grew without plan, becoming crowded and filthy, as people threw garbage and their own waste into streets already fouled with the excrement of freely roaming farm animals. The water was often contaminated, the food insect-ridden, and personal hygiene so unknown that even the kings of England bathed only for special occasions, rarely more than 3 times a year. As a result of all this, the people of the Middle Ages lived a life of endless struggle with epidemic, disease, and early death. Smallpox, scarlet fever, yellow fever, typhoid, diphtheria, tuberculosis, cholera, all were rampant. As many children died as lived. The average lifespan was less than 30 years. In some parts of Europe, less than 20. And epidemics were so common that records were kept of only the major ones, the largest being the catastrophic Black Death, which between 1438 and 1441 killed 60 million people, more than 1/4 of the people of the world. Even 400 years later, things weren't much better. Oh, we'd come a long way, no question about it. Yet New York in the 1850s was hardly cleaner than a medieval town. It was a city of squalid factories and tenements, without sewers or plumbing or public health authorities. Among children especially, there were yearly epidemics of nearly every disease but plague, which mercifully had been contained at last. More than 1 in 5 children died before they reached school age, and the average lifespan was still less than 40 years. Even so, not all was gloom. Behind the scenes, the winds of change were blowing. They had begun to stir in 1675, when a Dutch lensmaker named Van Leeuwenhoek looked at his own saliva in one of his magnifiers and found tiny moving things he called animalcules. What he'd discovered were microorganisms, the microscopic plants and animals that teem by the billions in every plant and animal, every centimeter of land and drop of water. It was nearly 200 years before Louis Pasteur proved for a fact that microorganisms cause infection. But even without proof, people had suspected it for some time. and they had begun to demand that something be done. Oh, it was a heady time, the mid-1800s, an age of reform, filled with zeal for improving the lot of the poor and the average citizen. It was a time when people like Joseph Lister and Florence Nightingale helped physicians and the public understand the connection between germs and disease. When science was developing ways to identify those germs, and when industry was discovering ways to control them with soaps, disinfectants, and pharmaceuticals. Put it all together, and for the first time, you had the recognition that disease could be controlled, the belief that it should be controlled, and the makings of a sanitation revolution that soon after the turn of the century had brought such medical advances as vaccines and the widespread use of antiseptics. Our cities soon had the benefits of garbage collection, paved streets, public sewer systems, water treatment, and pumping stations, the advent of public health authorities, and the habit of regular bathing. Most of us weren't as rich as the old kings of England, but we sure did smell better, and lived longer, too. By 1920, the death rate among children was 1/15 of what it had been 60 years before. Now, it's barely a 50th, and on the average, we live nearly twice as long. Today, we know that bacteria and viruses can grow in almost any environment on Earth, no matter how hot or cold. We're aware that they can be carried by anything that moves, the wind, insects, water, ourselves. Through the chemical and pharmaceutical industries, we've developed products that can control them without causing damage. Most of all, we've come to see that sanitation doesn't simply prevent disease, it also contributes directly to our industries and our institutions. Good cleaning and maintenance improve our leisure and comfort. They promote our better health, help prevent fire, accident, equipment failure, create a more pleasant working environment, and contribute to our productivity. Quite an achievement for just a few decades' work, and yet none of that achievement is guaranteed. The benefits of modern sanitation could be lost far more quickly and easily than they were gained. Preserving them is the goal of sanitation professionals. Thousands of dedicated people working in every city and town across the country. People like you. As those most directly responsible for cleaning and maintenance, you are the people everyone else relies on to assure the safety and appearance of our businesses and institutions, our schools and hospitals, hotels and residential environments. Your work may often be unseen, but its contributions are nothing less than essential. So are the contributions of another group of cleaning and maintenance professionals, the people who manufacture and distribute cleaning and maintenance chemicals, equipment, and supplies, including those of us who belong to the International Sanitary Supply Association, ISSA. We're more than 3,000 companies working together to improve public health, to educate other professionals in our industry, to promote research, and to provide the equipment, chemicals, and information you need to do your job and do it well. We're known as the experts in cleaning and maintenance, and we do everything possible to live up to that reputation. There's no question about it. The world we live in today is very different from the world of just 100 years ago. True, we still have our share of maladies to conquer, but many are things our ancestors never lived long enough to contract. Yes, whatever the old days may have had going for them, when it comes to cleaning and sanitation, the good days are these days.